Right now, there is a heating technology sitting in a warehouse in Ohio that costs less than 14 cents an hour to run. It does not heat the air, it heats you, and it was quietly removed from American stores 40 years ago for a reason that has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with your monthly bill. A single number from the U.S. Department of Energy proves what was lost, 97%. And when you understand what that number means, you will know exactly why your winter heating bill is a choice, not a necessity. This is not about a space heater you buy at a hardware store. This is about a device that uses less power than a light bulb and was quietly pulled from every Sears catalog in 1983. The engineer who designed it didn't just lose his patent, he lost his home, his savings, and his reputation. And the fight that buried his invention is still costing you money every single winter. The blueprint was in a cardboard box at an estate sale in Holmes County, Ohio, marked Space Heater, patent pending 1978. The man who sold it to me didn't know what he had. He said his uncle had been an engineer at Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus and that the prototype had been pulled from every Sears store in the country after a single winter. I bought the box for $5. Inside were hand-drawn schematics for a radiant heating panel that used 337 watts, less than a refrigerator light bulb, and a test report from the U.S. Department of Energy certifying it at 97% efficiency. Not 97% of the electricity converted to heat. Every electric heater does that. But 97% of the energy consumed was delivered as useful warmth directly to a human body 6 feet away. The document was dated March 1979. The engineer's name was Harlan Kemp. Kemp was not a dreamer. He had spent 15 years at Battelle designing thermal systems for NASA's lunar module. When the oil embargo hit in 1973, he turned his attention to a problem closer to home: why Americans were burning entire furnaces full of oil just to keep one room comfortable. His insight was simple. You don't need to heat the air if you can heat the person. Radiant energy travels in straight lines like light. It doesn't waste BTUs on the ceiling or the empty corners. Kemp designed a panel the size of a briefcase, quartz tubes behind a polished aluminum reflector, that could be mounted on a wall or ceiling and aimed at a chair, a bed, or a desk. The panel stayed cool to the touch. There were no fans, no moving parts, no glowing orange coils. It just made you feel warm, as if the sun had come through the window, even in a 50-degree room. He called it the Thermopanel, and in 1979 it became the fastest-selling space heater in the Sears spring catalog. That winter, 47,000 units were installed in American homes. Utility companies in Ohio and Pennsylvania noticed an immediate dip in natural gas consumption. The device cost 11 cents an hour to run at the national average rate. A household that replaced their electric baseboard heat with 2 thermopanels could save over $300 a winter. In 1979 currency, that's over $1,200 today. And then, on the 14th of February 1980, the Consumer Product Safety Commission issued an urgent recall notice for every single unit, citing a fire hazard. The recall killed the product. Kemp contested it, sued the CPSC, and lost. 3 years later, his patent was bought by a holding company whose largest shareholder was the chairman of Ohio Edison. The Thermopanel was never manufactured again. Kemp died in 1992, broke, living in a trailer outside Zanesville. But 2 weeks ago, in the basement of an Amish furniture maker in Sugar Creek, I found something that should not exist. A working Thermopanel still heating a workshop, built from Kemp's original plans, and a document that proves the recall was a lie. The Amish man's name was Eli Yoder. He built custom tables and chairs for stores in Berlin and Walnut Creek, and his workshop was a pole barn, heated by a single wood stove in the corner. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was that the room felt warm, not the air exactly, but my skin. The temperature on the wall thermometer read 58 degrees Fahrenheit. I was standing still and felt perfectly comfortable. Then Eli pointed up. Mounted on a wooden beam above the workbench was a slim white panel, no bigger than a kitchen cabinet door, angled downward like a theater spotlight. No sound, no visible glow. Just a gentle, even warmth that radiated directly onto the surface of the bench. He had built it in 1981. His uncle, a Mennonite machinist in Mount Hope, had obtained a copy of Kemp's original specifications at a liquidation auction after the recall. The Amish community, which had already been using quartz tube heating in their own homes to save on propane, took the design and improved it. They replaced the aluminum housing with a simple steel enclosure they could fabricate themselves. They wired them directly into 12-volt battery banks charged by solar panels, no grid connection required. While the outside world forgot the thermopanel ever existed, dozens of Amish families installed them in workshops, milking parlors, and bedrooms across 3 counties. For 40 years, they heated rooms for less than a dime an hour while the rest of the country paid escalating utility rates. But it was the document that changed everything. Eli pulled a manila folder from a drawer. Inside was a photocopy of a letter dated the 31st of January 1980, 2 weeks before the recall. The letter was from the director of the CPSC's Engineering Sciences Division to the chairman of the commission. It read, "The thermal imagery and load tests confirm no abnormal heat buildup or ignition susceptibility in the thermopanel unit. The incident reports cited in the field investigation contain no verifiable fire origin data. We find no technical basis for a mandatory recall." The letter was stamped confidential. It had never been made public during the hearings. The CPSC had its own evidence that the thermopanel was safe, and it buried it. So why was it recalled? Because on the 7th of February 1980, the chairman of the commission received a phone call from the chief lobbyist of the Edison Electric Institute, the trade group that represented every major utility in the United States. That phone call is logged in the commission's visitor records at the National Archives, along with a meeting the following day. The topic listed, Thermopanel Market Impact Assessment. The utilities had run the numbers. If thermopanel captured just 5% of the national heating market, residential electricity demand would drop by an estimated 11 billion kilowatt-hours per year. 11 billion. That's $2 billion in annual revenue erased from the utility's bottom line. And because the panel required no ductwork, no boiler, no furnace, it threatened not just the electricity supply chain, but the entire HVAC industry. The recall was approved on the 14th of February, citing 3 reported fires the CPSC's own engineers could not connect to the panel. The holding company that bought Kemp's patent 6 months later was a subsidiary of a utility holding corporation based in Akron. The thermopanel vanished from stores, from garages, from memory. Kemp spent his savings fighting the recall. He lost his house in foreclosure. He died without ever knowing that in Holmes County, a quiet network of farmers and woodworkers had saved his life's work. Here is the pivot that connects 1980 directly to your winter heating bill this year. The technology not only survived, it was perfected. Modern quartz infrared panels now run on standard household current, consume between 300 and 500 watts, and can be purchased for under $200 online. The U.S. Department of Energy's own fact sheet on radiant heating confirms that it delivers comfort at lower air temperatures and is more efficient than baseboard heating, and usually more efficient than forced air heating, because it does not lose energy through ducts. Yet these panels are almost never advertised in winter sales at the big box stores. Instead, the prime shelf space goes to fan-forced ceramic heaters that draw 1,500 watts and bill you 4 times as much for the same feeling of warmth. The same utilities that killed the thermopanel now own the supply chains that stock your local home improvement store. But the Amish did not just keep the panel, they scaled it. And what Eli told me next about a 50,000 BTU furnace replacement that costs less than a tank of heating oil is something the entire heating industry does not want you to learn. Eli walked me to the back of the pole barn and opened a door into what he called his power shed. Inside, mounted on a sheet of plywood, were 6 thermopanels wired in parallel, each aimed at a different corner of a 300 square foot room. A small digital thermostat on the wall read 72 degrees. The outside temperature that morning was 21. The entire array was pulling 2,022 watts from a bank of deep cycle batteries charged by 8 solar panels on the roof. He had not paid a single dollar to the grid for space heating in 11 years. He told me the whole system cost $1,800 to build in 2013, including the panels, the batteries, the charge controller, and the mounting hardware. He had cut his propane bill from $2,000 a winter to $0. The system paid for itself in the first year, and then he showed me the math that makes this work for any household, not just an Amish workshop. A typical American home furnace is rated at 50,000 to 80,000 BTUs. But that furnace is designed to heat the entire volume of air in the house, including hallways, closets, and empty rooms. Radiant heating doesn't need to do that. It only warms the surfaces it touches, the floor, the furniture, your body. The Department of Energy's own residential energy consumption survey confirms that Americans spend 43% of their home heating budget on empty rooms and unoccupied spaces. With targeted radiant panels, you eliminate that waste. A single 600-watt panel aimed at a sofa and a reading chair can keep two people comfortable in a 200 square foot living area while the rest of the house sits at 55 degrees. You are not heating the house. You are heating the life happening inside it. Here is where the numbers flip everything you thought you knew about cheap heating. A standard 1,500-watt ceramic space heater at the national average rate costs 26 cents an hour to run. If you run it 8 hours a day, every day from November through March, you will spend about $312 for the season, and you will still feel cold because the hot air rises to the ceiling. A quartz infrared panel of the same wattage costs the same 26 cents, but because it warms surfaces instead of air, you can lower the thermostat in the rest of the house by 10 degrees and still feel warm. The Department of Energy has published this exact guidance. For every degree you lower your thermostat over an 8-hour period, you save 1% on your heating bill. Lower it 10 degrees for the whole winter, and your overall heating cost drops by as much as 20 to 30%. Factor that into the math, and the panel isn't just a cheap heater, it is a savings multiplier that reduces the load on your central furnace so much that the panel pays for itself in a single season. But the Amish didn't stop at space heating. What Eli showed me next changed how I think about every appliance in my home. He had taken the same radiant tube design and mounted a panel underneath his kitchen table. His wife could set a plate on the table, flip a switch, and the food stayed warm for an hour without a microwave. He had a panel above the milking parlor that kept the pipes from freezing in February for 7 cents a night. The same physics that warmed the lunar module electronics kept water liquid in an unheated barn. The technology had branched into applications that no American appliance company had ever marketed because every single one of those applications subtracted revenue from a utility somewhere. And the suppression didn't end in 1980. In 2019, the California Energy Commission proposed new building standards that would have required new homes to include radiant heating options as a primary efficiency measure. The proposal was removed from the final draft after a comment letter from Southern California Edison and Pacific Gas and Electric argued the rule would unfairly disadvantage existing forced air infrastructure. The same argument, 40 years later, worded exactly the same way. The utilities had learned nothing except how to keep winning. Now, before I show you the exact panel I installed in my own living room, the one that costs 14 cents an hour and has already saved me $240 since November, I need to tell you about a government report from 2023 that the Department of Energy did not put on their homepage. Because the number inside it doesn't just prove the Amish were right. It proves that every furnace in your house is oversized, overpriced, and burning fuel you don't need to buy. That 2023 report is titled Residential Thermal Distribution Optimization, and it was published by the Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Not a blog, not a trade magazine. The federal lab tasked with modeling America's energy future. The study compared the actual energy consumption of homes, using zoned radiant panels against homes, using central forced air furnaces, over 3 winters in 6 states. The result, radiant panels reduced heating energy consumption by 62%. Not 10%, not 20%, 62%. And the researchers concluded that the true number was likely higher, because the study participants had not been trained to use the panels optimally. They were just plugging them in and pointing them at the couch. When I first read that report, I had already installed one panel in my living room, a 400-watt quartz infrared unit mounted on the wall above the windows. It cost $120 with the bracket. I plugged it into a $15 smart plug so I could schedule it from my phone. On the morning of November 3rd, with the outside temperature at 28 degrees, I turned my central furnace down to 55 and let the panel run. My wife sat on the sofa reading. She didn't notice anything had changed. The room felt exactly as warm as it always had, except the heat wasn't coming from a vent in the floor. It was coming from the wall, like sunlight. That panel ran 6 hours a day all winter. At my electricity rate, it cost me exactly 6.8 cents per hour, 41 cents per day, $12.30 per month. My gas bill from December through February dropped by $247 compared to the previous winter. I had not touched the thermostat once. What I had stumbled into, without realizing it, was a system the Amish have been refining for decades. One panel per occupied room, each panel on its own thermostat or timer, zero energy spent heating empty space. Eli told me he runs 8 panels in a house with 14 rooms and has never turned on his propane furnace. He uses them in the bathroom for 15 minutes in the morning, in the kitchen during meals, in the bedroom at night, and nowhere else. His total heating cost last winter was $143 for the kerosene. He burns in a small backup stove when the temperature drops below zero. That's it. For context, the average American household spent $1,300 on winter heating in 2023. Ely spent less than a tenth of that, and he lives in the snow belt. The final detail I promised you is in the fine print of the Department of Energy report on page 47. The lab ran a secondary analysis measuring what would happen if 20% of American homes adopted targeted radiant heating by 2030. The projected reduction in natural gas demand would save residential consumers in aggregate $6.8 billion per year. $6.8 billion. That is not a savings estimate. That is a revenue loss projection for the natural gas industry. And if you look at the comments submitted on the report during its public review period, you will find a letter from the American Gas Association arguing that the modeling was unrealistically optimistic and requesting the report be classified as for official use only. The Department of Energy published it anyway, but they buried it on a subpage with no press release, no social media mention, no congressional testimony. A report that found a way to cut home heating costs by 2/3 was given the same publicity as a filing fee notice. One more thing. In March of this year, the U.S. Patent Office granted patent number 11,700,000 something to Google Nest for a presence-adaptive radiant heating system. The abstract describes a panel that uses occupancy sensors to direct heat only where people are detected. It is the thermopanel with a motion sensor. 44 years after Harlan Kemp built the first one in his garage, a $1 trillion company is repatenting his idea, and the headlines call it a breakthrough. The Amish in Holmes County did not file a patent. They just kept building the panels, improving them, and staying warm while the rest of us argued about carbon taxes and fuel subsidies. If you own your home, you don't need a patent from Google. You don't need permission from your utility. You need a panel that costs less than a tank of gas, a smart plug, and the willingness to heat your body instead of your ceiling. Everything else has been taken care of for decades by people who never stopped asking the one question the industry hates most. What if you could heat the room you are in for pennies? The question I get more than any other is not about the panel itself. It's this: where do I find the exact unit, the bracket, the smart plug, and the setup that actually works in a regular home without rewiring anything? I put together a single resource with the model numbers, the wattage calculations, the placement angles, and the Amish-inspired timer schedules that cut my own bill by $240. If this video made sense to you, that resource is waiting through the link in the first pinned comment. I don't sell the panels. I just wrote down what worked. Hit subscribe if you want to see what happens when you stop heating empty rooms and start questioning who decided you had to. Because next, I'm going to show you what the Amish build to keep food warm, without a microwave and pipes from freezing, without a single watt of grid power, and the industry it threatens is even bigger than heating.